Electronic Arts were once a powerhouse in video game publication. They have published many well-known games from many franchises that you may have actually heard of but didn't know that they had a hand in, such as The Bard's Tale in 1985, Wasteland in 1988, and American McGee's Alice and Alice Madness Returns. Believe it or not, they used to actually get really experimental with the games they funded and published. It wasn't all sports and licensed games from hit properties like Star Wars. I may be showing my age here, but what you're seeing now, for instance, is a game called Def Jam Fight for New York, a fighting game for the 6th generation of consoles, which for those of you who aren't nerds like me, that's the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox. With fighters including, I kid you not, Snoop Dogg, Busta Rhymes, Ludacris, and Exhibit. Now, could you imagine having this game with modern rappers from big labels like Interscope and Republic so that rap beefs could be played out by the fans in a game without real violence? But I digress, because, dear reader, the year is 2004, and a small studio was making a big name for itself out of Santa Monica, California. Pandemic Studios was a studio for hire developing games for Activision, 3DO, and THQ, and had just released their second game for LucasArts, Star Wars Battlefront. For those old enough to remember a time when Star Wars Battlefront wasn't a game developed by EA DICE, welcome to the party. How's life treating you? For everyone else, I'm sorry that you couldn't live through that spectacular time in gaming, and I hope you're doing well. With an average score of 80 on Metacritic and high praise from the majority of reviewers, a sequel was all but guaranteed to be greenlit. 7 months after the release of Battlefront, a sequel was officially announced on April 21st of 2005. Despite working on 2 new IPs that would both release in 2005, Pandemic shipped both Mercenaries, Battlefield of Destruction, and Star Wars Battlefront for LucasArts, and Destroy All Humans for THQ. These 2 games alone warrant their own deep dive, but we're already creeping up on 2 pages here. The next few years were fantastic for Pandemic. THQ's Full Spectrum Warrior and Destroy All Humans would both get a sequel. This is when EA entered the discussions and purchased Pandemic's parent company, VG Holding Corp, in 2007. Now that the acquisition is finalized, Pandemic is officially a first-party studio. Their next game, Mercenaries 2: World in Flames, was now going to be published by EA instead of LucasArts, the publisher of the first game. Shortly after this, the development began on the studio's magnum opus, The Saboteur. Unfortunately, this, along with the studio's other project, Lord of the Rings Conquest, would actually be their coup de grace. In an interview with GameDeveloper.com, former Pandemic Studios president Josh Resnick had this to say about the closure of his studio and their acquisition by EA.
I think a lot of things kind of happened at once. Right around the time we sold, the industry started undergoing some massive changes. I think that kind of forced EA to make some massive structural changes as well. I think that might have put us out of alignment. Those were arguably forces beyond our control. And then something that was in our control. But what was just a tough thing to manage was that when we got bought, we were growing our teams and taking on even bigger challenges. I mean, almost every project that Pandemic was working on at the time was a huge, unwieldy, massive world game. And they're just really expensive and also really challenging from a technology standpoint.
Even from the start, the game was in for a rough launch. By December of 2008, the world already had Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, a game with over 11.8 million copies sold. Now, we don't have to mention how big of a deal Modern Warfare 2 was for the video game and content creation industries, but for a new IP to come out a month after, that had to be tough. The crazy thing was, critics were giving The Saboteur glowing reviews from launch. So the question is, were their competitors the only reason that the game failed? You see, the industry and EA in particular hated the secondhand market because A, they couldn't profit from you reselling your games, and B, they couldn't track how well their games were selling because people would wait to buy.
С нами Бог. Remember, no Russian.
So, EA had an idea: DLC on the disc that had to be unlocked with a code. One of these features they locked behind a code was multiplayer access. Either you bought a brand new copy of the game and got the code included, or you paid $4.99 for the code to unlock multiplayer on your pre-owned copy. You can just tell this was thought of in a boardroom, can't you? Now, that solves their theoretical problems with multiplayer games, but what about fully single player experiences? A week before The Saboteur was to be released, EA announced the Midnight Show DLC. Free to players who buy the game brand new, the expansion provides the player with new brothels and hiding spots. It also includes a knife-throwing minigame that lets the player earn in-game items, such as a car not bound during the main campaign. Most notably, however, installing the add-on automatically renders all brothel girls in the game topless, although nudity can still be toggled on and off. And I love the responses from Sean Devlin, the main character. Before release, Time magazine published an article asking the question, will sex sell a video game? For EA, the goal was to just get people through the door. For Pandemic Software, the goal was to keep people there. In the long term, though, the legacy of the game that sex sold is quite a reductive one. I mean, for fans of the Mercenaries series, it builds and adds onto the formula in a positive way. You have the foul-mouthed protagonist that you're used to, working to overthrow a deadly regime using everything at their disposal. There are a few differences, though. This is not a sequel by any means. The destruction has been reduced, for instance, and the realistic art style of Mercenaries has been toned down to include a much more stylized look. Sean Devlin is an Irish race car driver and mechanic turned saboteur in the French resistance during the Nazi occupation of Paris in World War II. He worked to help the people of Paris fight back against their oppressors. His foul-mouthed demeanor is coupled with the breaking sensibilities of Parisian lifestyles. Some of the side missions are prime examples of this. One of the side mission strings that stood out to me the most has to be the one with Father Dennis. He is a Catholic priest that has heard too much of the atrocities of the Nazis during confession and can't live with himself as long as the Nazi commander was still breathing. So he contracts you to take him out of the picture after a ceremony. The Nazis had taken everything from him and killed hundreds of thousands at this point, and he needs justice.
Rest in peace, fuckface.
Doling out justice returns color to the world in a big wave, which is what makes this game unique. When the citizens of the area are still beaten down and are sold on the Nazi propaganda, the world is dark, bland, and grayscale. As you fight back against the Nazis, you raise the spirits of the Parisians, and the color and light return to Paris little by little. In a world of gray and never-ending despair, all it takes is one person to bring the color back to so many lives.
Consider that a fucking divorce.
The reviews were in, and IGNAU gave it a score of 83, stating, "While it's a little rough around the edges, we enjoyed the game more than we thought we would." Computer Games Online would give it a 95, stating,
I warmly recommend The Saboteur not only to sandbox fans, but also to people looking for a special atmosphere beyond anything else.
In their January 2010 issue, PC Gamer gave the game its most relevant review with an 86.
Finishing off and watching the credits roll is a bittersweet moment, as Pandemic's final game is also one of its finest.
PC Gamer was right. The studio's fate was sealed before the release of the game. The Saboteur was released on December 8, 2009, just 21 days after EA announced the closure of the studio, part of 1,500 total jobs cut at the company in the months surrounding the closure. While this story ends on an abrupt and somber note, Pandemic Studios left behind a legacy that would last through a generation of players who loved their big, bombastic battles and playgrounds of destruction, and that's something that EA cannot destroy. Games like The Saboteur are time capsules to many a gamer. Experiences that, once lost, will be nearly impossible to recapture. Luckily, there's physical media with hardware backwards compatibility and places like GOG on PC that give you true ownership of the games that you buy. No DRM, no always online, just a fun game. Follow the link in the description to go to the GOG store and purchase this gem. We are completely unaffiliated with GOG. I just love their mission.